David, it's your time.
Yes, Dr. Madie, I know. And
How are you? How are you today? It's your time, and your group will be there.
I certainly hope so. I just spoke to Hilton. He should be here any moment.
And Eoin?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the other participants. Hilton is part of our company, so I know he will be here, but I'm not sure about the others.
Yes. How are you today, David?
I'm fine, and it is good to be back, Dr. Madie. After our session yesterday, we're going to cover some new topics today, and it is always a pleasure.
I need also to introduce you, David, to Trent. Trent Simons is from the Swiss, yes. And he is specialized in new tools for supporting the entrepreneurs. He working closely with the entrepreneurs by using a spirit of game. Yeah. Spirit of the game. Introduce yourself, Trent, to David. David have a special tool. We call it 360 Growth Wheel. And you will now hearing from us about 360 Growth Wheel. And you will be participating, Trent, in the next session, not this session, okay? Be with us.
Okay, sounds good. That gives me time to check in on my team meeting that is waiting for me to check with them. But I'll quickly introduce myself to David. So yes, the Spirit of the Game is an international coaching coalition. We're also a think tank and an NGO, and we also run the Impactful Business Network, the Impactful Women's Network, and the Impactful Youth Network, and the Impactful Teachers Network. Our overall mission is really to inspire and empower average, everyday people to get involved in impact. Our mantra is impact is for everyone, no matter what your career, because there's far too many people basically sitting on the fence, either not thinking it's their job to do this, or it's their company's job, or just not knowing how.
Right. I did listen to the last. We have Dr. Madie in the background, so it's a little bit hard to hear what we are thinking.
Presentation مميزة. أتمنى أن تكون موجود معنا إذا
Dr. Madie, you are not muted.
مميزين يعني.
But
yes, I'm so sorry.
You were not muted, so we had a little hard time continuing the conversation, but don't worry about it. But Trent, I will check out your company, and I know you're running off to a team meeting, but it'd be a pleasure to connect.
I'll be back in the next half hour.
All right, I see. Very good. So long. And yes, Hilton is now with us here as well, Dr. Madie. So we are ready to start if you are.
I think, David, you can start because you are reaching the time. And you are here and Hilton there. And the other two person, I will be in contact with them. I know it will be soon joining us.
Yes, sounds good. And I'm not sure if everybody was here yesterday, but we are with Growth Wheel, and we are offering a training and certification program for small business advisors all over the world. We offer a complete business advisory system with a CRM system for advisors, a client portal, so advisors and clients, businesses can work together. We have an e-learning platform, and we have a business tool library with visual one-page tools that we have been provided for the world for 15 years. And we're also in South Africa, where Hilton is our local representative, my business partner, and the co-founder of Growth Wheel South Africa. And we may start off on a light note, because I would like to tell you the story of how Growth Wheel got started in South Africa. And I think it's a relevant story for anyone else who is a business advisor. It is a story that speaks to the power of traveling and to make quick decisions. So the true story is that back in, was it 2015, I think, Hilton? Well, before that, Hilton and I had crossed our paths. Yeah, before we had gotten to know each other, we had met at events and conferences, and were just acquaintances. back in the days. And what happens then to me one day, I'm in Denmark, where I'm from, and I'm doing one of our certification courses for a group of 25 business advisors from the Danish business advisory system. And my colleague comes in right before the end of the second day and says to me, you have a meeting tomorrow with the South African government agency called CEDA. And I say, yes, I know it's the webinar. It's 10 o'clock tomorrow. Yes, my colleague says, there's just one little thing. They don't think it's a webinar. They think you are coming to South Africa to present in person. And I say, oh, well, that's too bad to tell them that, I'm in Denmark and that's not possible. So hopefully the webinar will be good enough at 10 o'clock. And she says, yes, the thing is, I think you should go down there. And I said, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is 10 o'clock tomorrow. I still have 2 hours of training to go. She said, yes, I checked the airport. There's a flight at 6 o'clock. You can just make it. And you'll be there. You'll be landing at 9 in South Africa the next morning. You can make it to the meeting. I'm like, but I have to be back the next day. I would have to go there. I would have to join a meeting for an hour and travel back to Denmark. This is a 14, 16-hour flight and very expensive to fly back and forth in the same day, as you who are travelers will know. So I'm like, I don't know. So I thought, let me call my friend Hilton, just to get a feeling about what kind of meeting is this. So I call Hilton. He always picks up the phone. And I tell Hilton, look, there's this webinar, and now they think I'm showing up in person. And Hilton says, who are you meeting with? And so they're called CEDA. This is the South African, enterprise development agency. So, and they're apparently having a meeting, all the incubators coming together. I haven't spoken to them. They wanted a meeting. Do you think I should go? And Hilton said the words, if I were you, I would be packing my bags right now. So I didn't have any bags. I was doing a training session. I went to the airport. I bought a shirt in the airport, went on the plane, and showed up at 10 o'clock in Johannesburg, presented for these incubators, and the rest is history. Growth Wheel ended being implemented with all the CEDA incubators, around 50, I think, at the time, maybe a little bit more. So a good example of how it is good for a company to make fast decisions, how travel is important, and how networking is important, as well as how trust is important. I needed Hilton's trusted advice to make that decision. So that's how I would call it, Hilton. I don't know about you.
Well, mine goes a little bit further back. I remember seeing this slightly pale Ugandan at the time behind a camera. And we brought together the world's leading open source thought leaders on trying to explore how do we get people to adopt open source software. And you were doing a documentary on your work in East Africa. And so David, from a tech background, well celebrated, known Danish European successful entrepreneur. And I was like, what's he doing behind the camera? But he's a man of many skills. And part of what we were discussing on Lake Victoria was, we had my boss at the time and a great mentor and a great guy on the African continent, talking about how did he sell his business for $350 million. And of course, David, you had also sold a company back then in Denmark, right? An IT company, and you decided to come help and accelerate adoption of ICT and bridge a digital divide in East Africa, or West Africa rather, Central Africa. And that's how we met. We felt that the business plan as a framework for supporting startups and businesses were broken. And of course, David had not just an animated opinion about it, but he later came back to Johannesburg in South Africa. And I didn't quite understand what he was saying. But it made complete sense that we would need it in Africa and potentially the rest of the world. And this was in 2005. This was before anyone was talking modern business models, right? But this is the power again of when you're a business owner, when you're a business advisor, that you go with an optimistic mindset, and that you're always open to change. And I think, you know, that for me is some of the critical characters that a business advisor has, is that you listen, and when there's an opportunity, you then build whatever your customers want and the market wants. And I think that is, you know, where we said one day, when it's all colored in and it works, we'll do something big in South Africa. And then, of course, in 2012, the president announced the National Business Incubation Ecosystem, an agenda or a mandate for government to establish 255 incubators. And in fact, in 2012, I think leaders around the world was making all kinds of announcements around this. And so in 2012, I think you were in South Africa, at the Nelson Mandela University, where they first discussed, you know, modern business model frameworks. And in fact, between yourself, Business Model Canvas, Lean Startup, Saraswati, you were a little bit, you were an early starter. People were confused about what you're saying, right? So like a little bit, people don't understand Elon Musk, but he's doing amazing things, right? And similar with the iPhone, right? The world is blessed with people like yourself. And so, you know, we were very fortunate that in 2013, we had our first certification in Africa at the Innovation Hub. And a couple years later, we had about 34 customers, I think, in South Africa at the time. And they recommended to the National Ministry of Small Business that we need a common language, we need a common ecosystem, we need common data, we need to all speak of the same hymn sheet. And so I remember after us doing our presentation, they asked the 64 incubators, so we won't decide for you, you as an ecosystem decide. And some of the people that made decisions there have been supporting businesses for 2 decades, 3 decades. It was well-seasoned people, right? That was almost the stalwarts of the national incubation ecosystem in South Africa. And they said to us, we're in trouble. and that's where it all started, right? But I do want to go back to 2006 when you fell asleep, and you said we'll do something big, right? And that big is now in 70 countries.
Yeah. Sweet memories, Hilton. Thanks for bringing it up. And that was a little introduction of us. I want to recognize that also we have our other panelists here on the call by now. Eoin Flavin, I wonder if I pronounced your name correctly. Is it Eoin? Eoin?
Hi, David. Good to see you. Great to hear from you, Hilton. It's Eoin. We Irish, we like to confuse.
All right. Right. Excellent. So we did some brief introductions here before you came in. Would you like to take the baton and say a few words about yourself? And if you would like to slide into starting your presentation, you are welcome to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I can do the presentation in a couple of minutes. Is it my turn, or are we ahead of schedule, or how does that?
Either way, I think Dr. Madie has gracefully allowed us to be flexible in how we do things, so we will take that opportunity. Hilton also has a presentation that we could kick off with, so maybe a quick introduction, and then Hilton, I'll hand it over to you so we keep some kind of protocol.
Okay, wouldn't want to be too precious about protocol, but that was my expectation, so I'll be ready for 15 minutes. So, welcome. Thank you very much for that, David, and to Dr. Madie for inviting us all here, of course. I'm calling you from Wicklow, near Dublin in Ireland. It's cold, it's wet, it's damp, it's windy. That's how you know it's Ireland. But we don't have the extremes of South Africa or the Middle East to deal with in weather or political issues. So I think we're a very lucky little island. And, you know, come on down if you want some peace and quiet anytime. So my background is, I've been innovating 30 years. I'm a systems guy. It's really, really easy to put me in a box. I'm also an ISO standards expert. So when we talk about, a global common set of concepts and language, well, that's going to come up in my talk in a little while. And I just love to innovate, but more than that, I love to help other people to innovate. So it's that link between how do you help people to innovate and how can these weird and wonderful ISOs actually help in innovating? Aren't standards and innovating opposites to each other? Well, we'll have a little look at that one when I'm talking a little bit later. Thanks for the opportunity, David.
Absolutely. Good to have you. And it'll be interesting to see how our presentations align. We may come at topics from a different point of view, which is interesting. So we can see how things connect. Hilton, maybe I want to start to pick up where you left and ask a large question to you about the ecosystem in South Africa. You are very well, familiar with the ecosystem, if not even one of the key players in the ecosystem. You are speaking at multiple conferences. In fact, I think you just came from one earlier here today. And to put things in perspective for us, what kind of trends have you seen in your ecosystem, say over the last 5 years or at whatever time horizon makes sense for you? What has been some of the turning points? What are we seeing happening right now? What did we see happen maybe right after COVID, if that's not still the case, during COVID or before COVID? Or were there any other global trends that you think influenced the ecosystem? I'm of the belief that many times, what we see in one country, some of the same things will happen in other countries. May happen a little bit differently, maybe with a different timing. But I think whatever you have to share is going to be relevant for the very international audience we have here today. So what are the trends that you have been observing in the past and is observing now?
I think the one thing that's been consistent, since the early 1900s, 1904, when Harvard kind of put that we should have an MBA, is that entrepreneurship is structured, right? Yes, there's chaos, and someone believes in their idea, which is either a product or a service, and they'll do it despite knowing where their money comes from, right? The profitability and the sustainability. But the word structure has been consistent for over 100 years when we started formalizing the idea of business. And so wherever we find ourselves throughout the continent, of course, Growthwheel is used in 24 countries on the African continent. We find that there's nuances, right? And those nuances it has a bit of language, it has a little bit of context on red tape, all kinds of things around financing and etc. But the one thing that's consistent for me is that business, in particular small business and startups, they need someone to help them take this chaos. They always do a business plan and it goes like this, right? It starts and it goes like that. Is that you need a business advisor to take you through that processes. And that makes entrepreneurship very structured. But if we consider pre-COVID, and I can't even remember what happened pre-COVID because it's been such a big part of our life, but I think it's the one thing that brought us all together globally, right? Our economies are struggling. We've seen a boost of small business and startups growing. We've seen in some areas, in some countries where there's huge employment. In other countries, the economies has just gone down and people had to start their own businesses. And so we've also seen post-COVID that there's two things that really came up. Is that, yes, we're all operating on a level of trauma, on a level of anxiety. And so that language really in the business advisory sector became empathetic. So it's less about what's your revenue, what's your jobs, how much jobs are you going to create? But the conversation went to, so you need funding, but for what in your growth plan? So it's a little bit more targeted, right? And that what opens up a whole lot of other questions, right? So what is your ambition? Yeah. And that ambition then leads into you've got to make decisions and take action. These days, David, well, I would say these days, and it's very short, we have AI. And if you then, I go back to the 2000s or the internet boom, it reminds me of this, right? How there's been a change, and it was almost like a flip of the way we did things, right? And I see this empathy language that we may have had as business advisors, but post-COVID has taken another journey, right? And I have seen with AI, not just our own AI, I'm sure you could show it off, it'd be lovely. I'll challenge you to that. But we've seen our AI has helped us as business advisors that is so focused on helping businesses achieve their outcomes, be it revenue, sustainability, market, whatever the case may be. I've seen AI help our particular market with applying empathy with this particular business owner. And we can call them an entrepreneur, a hustler, a small, big size, what doesn't really matter, is that we find there's a lot more empathy coming into play in how we support businesses.
So this is interesting. When you think of AI as, computers and can analyze data, can deal with big data, it's huge language models, all these things. And then yet what you're saying is that AI seems to humanize things in a certain way. Has that got to do with how the AI can speak to the entrepreneurs? How would you describe the experience of what the AI brings to, when it comes to empathy and that human touch? Maybe give an example of how you've implemented that, because I know you have.
Yes. A part of being a business advisor is not to tell the business owner what they need to do, because if it goes wrong, they'll blame you for that, right? And so you need to have a checklist, right? And historically, like accountants have worksheets, we have a checklist, we have tools that enables a conversation. And that required a lot of time from us, a lot of listening skills, a lot of, going out to find data. You would have a conversation for an hour and only come back a week later, right? There's complex assessments that you have to do. There's multiple gaps. Now, and then of course, what you find is that because you were so focused on this work, you hardly built this trust relationship with your business founders that you're working with, because you want to get the data so you can get to the next customer, right? What AI allows you to do is partner with you the same way that we warm up water. Instead of go fetch water at the river, make a fire, get a pot, heat it up, and then have your coffee down the line. Now you can switch a kettle on, or you can go to the machine and it makes it for you. So I think AI, the way that internet has helped it over the years, for a business advisor, has become a tool that allows us to be empathetic. We can now be more human being than human doing. And I think what we've seen with our AI feature to help ESOs, entrepreneurship support organizations, with not only their own decision-making and action and taking action, is that AI suddenly produces, if you have an ambition and you've kind of defined what the ambition is, and you've put up a matrix of measuring that ambition, that AI can now give you options that you would have not thought about to make decisions and take action.
Yeah.
And I think that, it makes you just like a super, I don't know what we call ourselves. I think we're magicians. But this one makes us a little bit more resourceful. So, it just, for me, it's amazing over the last 4 months, how my empathy with supporting entrepreneurship support organizations, but also startups and small businesses, with a level of empathy in combination with AI that I thought would not be possible, but it is.
So it's you mentioned that advisors can become some kind of magicians with the assistance of AI for sure. You have trained and been part of training hundreds of small business advisors in South Africa. What would you say with AI coming in? What are the qualifications of someone who's going to advise a small business today? AI can give a lot of the answers, but then again, you also talk about how AI can help with the empathy. If someone here in the audience today would like to be a good business advisor and make use of these technologies, what would you say are the qualifications required now with AI on the playing field? What are the main qualifications for advisors?
You know, it's the fastest one of after coaching. And there's a difference between coaching and mentorship, right? But after coaching, it's one of the most critical, it was one of the most critical professions post-COVID, right? But what we've also seen is that, you know, I can be an IT guy tomorrow and my business don't work, and I become a business advisor tomorrow. And I think, you know, I'm looking forward to Eoin's almost a flavin. I'm going to get that right at one point.
You can call me anything you like, Hilton, so long as you call me.
Is that we do need, you know, we can't have doctors that are not resourced or are not skilled, and you know, that doesn't have the right tools and the right resources, etc., to operate on someone's heart. And if you look at the
excuse me, I don't want to interrupt. Do we have any slides? Because I received some comments in my WhatsApp. If there are some slides, or you want to leave it open discussion, it's up to you. Do we have any slides?
And I'm certainly, Hilton is about to hand it over to Eoin.
Yes, would you mind, please, continue your discussions, but if you present some slide, because the people want to catch up with you, some information.
Of course.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Take
Excellent.
your time.
One last comment from you, Hilton. Do you want to round it off?
Yes, is that, you know, we have 800 million businesses around the world. They create around 86% of the global jobs. It contributes over 60% of global GDP. What we need for the next 10 years is for those 9 billion people that will, you know, be somewhere around the world, is that we need these small businesses to be fully supported. And we need people that enters the sector that uses a structured framework. And of course, AI is going to help us, but it can't be the only thing. You cannot use just AI, because as we've seen, there's lots of repetition. It's still being, you know, there's all kinds of challenges with what we have. And so you do need a structured framework. We need to leverage the same way that we use computers and software. We need to leverage all these things, including, you know, international systems like the ISO 27700 and others, so that we kind of elevate our profession in this designation. I mean, like, we recently launched our business advisor certification, which is kind of, it touched a lot on this empathy, David, that I'm talking about, right? And being resourceful and building trust and understanding. So I hope that in the presentations that you will share with the colleagues, is that you'll touch into that. You know, I've kept it without a presentation, but I think where we are now globally is that we've got to worry less about the technical compliance thing, whether you're registered, etc. We've got to understand the value of meeting the business owner where they are at emotionally and where they want to be from a dream perspective. And in between, they have some ambitions, and that growth plan is a combination of our own expertise, our own journeys, working with the ecosystem, working with country challenges, localization, but leverage what is out of the world. And now we can, but we also have to be structured. You can't just use AI as is. We have put together almost like, you know, we've curated it so that it works in a structured way. And so that's my parting shot on that, is that, empathy, AI, it is really an opportunity for us in this ever-changing evolution of not just tech, but business advisory. We are critical in the ecosystem of business owners around the world to the next phase of industrialization. We've come through 4, and business advisors has been critical in that evolution.
Thank you, Hilton, for sharing your insights and for bringing the word empathy and AI together in one sentence. Eoin, I will hand it over to you to start your presentation. I'll look forward to see it and to have a discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Hilton. Thank you very much, David. At the start, I'm just going to share a couple of links. It's not my presentation. The links are going in chat. I hope this goes to everybody who's here this evening. And if it doesn't, just let me know. And I'm sure with Dr. Madie's help, we will make sure everybody can access those links themselves. They're really for after the talk. In contrast to Hilton, this is a little bit less personable because I do have some slides, but maybe the slides have some information that will be useful for people after the event. So I'll put those up in just a couple of seconds. If you would give me just those couple of seconds to get this right.
David, I'm going off video so that I'm...
Okay,
that looks great. Thank you.
Okay, we're up and running then. Okay, welcome. Thanks very much for joining me, everybody. We've been introduced already, and I know everybody in this panel has some interest in innovating. And if we just hark back to Hilton's talk, we were talking about business advisors. Well, if we just reframe that just a little bit, this session is about innovators. More specifically, it's about people who need to manage innovation. And we're talking there about, not the ability to do one thing, one innovation, one hit wonder, which is cool, really important. And Lord knows some important impacts have arisen from one-off innovations. But what about an organization, which can mean a global corporation, a department in a struggling country, or an organization which is one lady and her cat? Any organization, any scale. What if they need to sustain the effort? What if they want to be able to innovate more than once? Well, that's really what I do. And what I really love doing is building the teams that hit those innovation peaks and sustain the effort. That typically means, knitting the capabilities, the ambition, the culture, and the habits, some words that Hilton and I'm sure David have already mentioned today. And it also means sticking with the program. This is about stubbornness, humility, but plenty of stubbornness. So during our next few minutes together, all I'm hoping is that we'll have a look at how you might do this at home, in your own organizations, in your future. Looking at a very brief version of my 30 years experience as I've used standards, as platforms or innovations, and then as I've helped to write what we now have as an ISO family of global best practice standards for innovation management. Okay? If you use those, and use them sensibly and well, don't get yourself caught in a knot, easy to do, they'll keep you on track. Then you can focus on the ambitions of your organization, your team, your capabilities that the team needs to make things happen, and the specific objectives, initiatives that you need to do. So I would hope in 10 minutes, you'll have a little bit better understanding of why this set of standards is so powerful. Understand which of those things, which of those books you'd want to access, PDF on the internet or a printed out copy on your desk. That's the way I use them, by the way. There's still a use for paper as a technology, along with AI, not instead of. Then have some clue, although we won't get very far into that in 10 minutes, as to how you actually make use of these standards. And the slides here are not intended to be very clever, but yes, peaks, multiple peaks. Where do you want to go to today? Innovation standards can help you go anywhere you like. Back to me in Ireland, I run a company called Stepstone. I'm head of an innovation practice. I'm also the founder of a community of innovators in Ireland called Innovate Ireland. And I advise clients, public and private, large and small, on innovation, but typically not on one-offs, typical long-term initiatives. Then looking at the world, I have spent 25 years working with, implementing, certifying, and latterly developing standards. And I'm currently helping with the core group that's writing ISO 56001, which will be the standard that you use if you want a certificate to show that you actually know what you're talking about. And I'm also involved in 56007 and several others of the families. Also, we've heard about the growth wheel. So my equivalent to that in terms of a platform that helps me extend my reach is Innovation 360. I'm a licensed practitioner in Greenbelt. So those are just some pieces of my background. Okay. Content today is really simple. It's really short. Let's talk about the ISO 56000 family, what it is, and what's that got to do with you, how might you use it. We won't get much into navigating the standards, but we will tease, and I'll show you a couple of suggestions that might be useful for you. And hopefully you'll go out with a couple of questions and some tips for how you can make the standards work for you. Okay. Back to preaching mode, which I'll stop soon, I promise. This is our family of standards, us being innovators, innovation management professionals, and the broader group, including entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs and other flavors of the breed. Okay. As I set this family, for us, agrees, corrals, and defines the fundamental concepts in our field. And it sets out what is necessary or recommended for innovation management to be successful. So not just one little piece of innovation, but to get an organization, however small, to get the capabilities and to align that with the strategy and to put the processes in place and to get the initiatives up and running and on the wheel, using David's phrase, to make sure we hit the peaks once and keep doing so. In the standards, you've got a global distillation of understanding validated by hundreds of experts around the world. There's more than 100 countries contributing to this work. That's a decade's work so far. You might call it a generational effort. If we look at timing, the first of these standards was published in 2019. And based on experience and learning and the fact that people don't get anything right first time, not perfectly, it's time for revision already. So the way these things work is this platform goes out in the world and that gets improved continuously. So it's a gift that keeps on giving. And we've got to watch out now in the next couple of years for 56001, which is currently being written. And the analog there would be, imagine or remember the impact that ISO 9001 had when it came out. However, this standard is not about compliance. It's about performance and growth. So the impacts from that should be considerable. Now, I don't think we should dive into this, but what I want to do is point out that in the next 7 or 8 minutes, we will touch on each of these points. What is ISO? What do we mean by standards? What's the family? What's in it? And then a little bit about some of the concepts, some of the definitions. We've probably heard that many, many times, so my intention is not to spend time in it, but just to show what the standards do for us there. Quickly, if you didn't know already, ISO, nice acronym, French, Greek, English, and several other languages, and it is the International Organization for Standardization. Most countries in the world are involved, and it has a huge impact on our current world and the future world. And you can be sure that there will be ISO standards relating to and for the adoption and use of AI. If we think about standards and us and innovation, one of the questions people ask is, why would you have a standard for innovation? Doesn't it kind of contradict itself? Well, if you take that little cup of tea example, and we Irish are very serious about our tea, you need a system or something. You need a couple of rules, like always have tea bags in the house, to have a cup of tea the way you want it. And making a cup of tea is not complicated. Innovating successfully and doing it more than once, it is pretty complicated. So there's no question I would suggest or propose that we do need a system. We do need standards, but we don't want them getting in the way. Well, that's what the 56,000 family is for. And if we think about these standards and what they should do, well, it should be a recipe, chemistry perhaps. It could be a measurement. If something is supposed to do this job, it must measure more than this, or be smaller than this, or fit inside this tube. Signposting. If you want to go here, do that. If you don't want to do that, go over here. And it should filter. It should filter and enable qualification. Good, bad, or better, okay, not acceptable. These are all really simple ideas, but in the world of trade and government and beyond, ISO standards are fundamental platforms for almost everything that we do. Then if we get back to our family, this slide just shows you a couple of the titles, the numbers. There's jargon in ISO, which we try and ignore. We get past it. What they do, though, is the 56,000 label tells you that if it's 56,000 and something, it's an innovation management standard, it's global best practice, and then there's specifics for different aspects of it. The two that I think you should concern yourself first and most are the first two listed here. Fundamentals and vocabulary. What is it that the innovation management field is? What does it mean? How does it operate? Basic principles, terms, and definitions. And any organization, if they're going to innovate consistently on a sustained basis, what should they have? What does experience globally tell us belongs in that best practice bucket? And 56002 is the global standard providing advice and guidance on how to put in and operate an innovation management system for any organization. As I highlighted a couple of minutes ago, 56001 is on the way. There's a link in that slide, and that link also entered the chat, so you can find all these standards yourself. But here is a list of the projects being undertaken by that piece of ISO. It's a piece of ISO called TC279, jargon, apologies. But now you know what it is, and it's easy to find it on the web or your tool of choice, AI or otherwise. Now, if we look at the standards themselves, again, paper, really useful thing to have on the desk while you've got 4 screens operating. These standards are short. That's one of the cool things about them compared to, say, a business book, 300 pages. It's only 20 pages in this. It would only take it 15, 20 minutes to read the first time. But on page 1, very helpful, they give us our definition of innovation. And this is the definition of innovation that the whole world has come to adopt, including OECD, parts of the United Nations, the World Patent Office, and most governments and departments are taking this on board in their adoption of innovation. Very formal at the start, new or changed entity, whatever that might be, realizing and distributing value. Formal, but really what does it mean for us? New, done, here, and adding value. Not halfway through. That's not an innovation. That's something that we would like to be an innovation. It doesn't have to be an invention as long as it's new here for us. That's really, really simplistic and can sound trivial. But that's one of our fundamental pieces. If we don't agree on that, going back to the previous speaker and the talk about common shared framework, ISOs give our field that common shared framework. And you can also quickly find those other innovation definitions in that standard. But you don't actually have to have the standard. On the slide, there's also a link that anybody can go free of charge and find that definition anytime. So the ISO standards are starting to implement or use or deploy the ISO standards is instant, free, and easy. Praise the Lord. What is that standard? 56,000. Well, it's a standard resource. It delivers global innovation management language. It captures the key concepts for innovation management and lists the core, not all, the core, most essential terms, and provides definitions that we can build on for decades to come. What I would recommend to anyone in this group is if you are ever looking at 56,000 or wondering what you should pick from it first, I would say really simple. Right in the middle, clause 4.3, jargon. There's 8 principles, and the 8 principles are priceless. I'll read them out and then we'll get back to reality. Realization of value. If you're not focused on realization of value, you're not innovating. Future-focused leaders. If the leaders are just trying to get profit out of the business today, or to achieve for their citizens what they were told 10 years ago to do, they're not innovating. Strategic direction. If your innovation isn't aligned with your ambitions and your strategic direction, it's very unlikely to produce high impact and to succeed for your organization. Culture. Everybody talks about culture eating strategy. Well, whatever about that, they certainly need to align. Okay. And there are a few more, but I will leave those aside for the moment. What I would recommend is that online browsing platform I referred to earlier is easy to look up, and you can quickly find some of the key pieces that we've been discussing here. Okay. The other standard I mentioned, I won't go into tonight, but just to highlight that it's been out for 3 years now, and it's being used globally. And there's some really interesting case studies, including a really interesting book that friends of mine, Magnus Carlsen, Joanne Hyland, and others have been involved, which shows how we can validate and see the impact of implementing that standard. One of the cool things about the standard is you don't have to implement the whole thing and get a certificate on the wall. If you have it to hand, you don't need a consultant to explain it. It's in simple language. You pay for it once, probably in your jurisdiction, it costs somewhere between 50 and 100 euros, $50 to $100. Then you don't need to rely on other people to understand what innovation management should be. It's in front of you. Disintermediation, I think, is the technical phrase for that. So if you like a closing question or set of questions from me, takeaways for you to think about later. Why are these platforms powerful? Sometimes because they're so simple. Sometimes because they've already been validated globally and will continue to improve, and they'll be a gift that keeps on giving for decades to come. How to use them? Look up the references I showed you. Buy a copy in paper or PDF and put it on your device locally. That reference can stand with you and stand for you, and you can check it out in about 30 seconds anytime you need it. A lot of my work is helping people to implement those in detail. There's no point in us talking about this evening. We wouldn't get very far. And I think you can see how, compared to a book, a brand, or a famous consultant, it doesn't replace these, but it's a really cool complement to those. And in some ways, although it's counter to people's expectations, it's actually really simple to use. A final question for you. 56001 is a requirement standard, the one that's being written now. That'll be the standard telling you, if you wish to have an innovation management system, and if you wish to get certified to prove to the world that you're good at doing innovation management, good at innovating, here's what you need to do. And the suggestion is that that's going to lead to thousands, maybe tens of thousands of organizations seeking certification. I don't need an answer from you tonight, but I wonder what you think. Is that madness, or are you and your organization mad for it? Okay. That, for me, ladies and gentlemen, is it. We're done. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll put the slides to bed, and I will share them with everybody later this evening.
Thank you so much. Eoin, that was very insightful, and it raises a lot of questions. We always welcome anybody who is participating or here on the panel to unmute or to raise their questions. I had a question myself for a start. And that came from, you just, in a sentence, you mentioned that anyone can use this, however small. So I think for most of, for many of, certainly of the participants here at Dr. Anadi's conference, they are working with small businesses. And I wonder if you could speak to, maybe you can imagine, or maybe you're familiar with a practical example of how a small business, it may have just a few employees. What would be an example of a way that they could get value from applying this framework, regardless whether they were certified, or as you suggested, you can actually start using the standard without getting the certification? What would be a practical example of how using this could make a difference?
Well, across the 30-odd thousand standards that ISO has published, there are lots that you wouldn't recommend to people with few resources.
Right.
And there are lots that are directly intended to be simple, such as the meter is defined by ISO. ISO is what defines the meter. There's a standard for the meter. And every other unit that we use as platforms for our other work around the world. So that's one example of how simple it can be. Then if we think of a word that you used in your question, certification. Well, if certification is a target in itself, and again, going back to Hilton's question, why? Why are you getting certified? It might be a really good idea, and really small organizations can get certified. But if the purpose of picking up the standard is to get the certificate on the wall, you're already focused on compliance. If you're focused on compliance, you're not looking at the standards to learn from. You're just saying to yourself, oh my God, how do I get through this in the smallest amount of time with the least amount of money spent and without my head being wrecked? It's your mindset, again, going back to something Hilton said, that limits what people can get from these standards. But if you're in, say, the medical device world or a regulatory environment, you can't actually get into those markets except by engaging in the standards. If you're an innovator, if you're the person who's been handed the role of helping an organization of one lady and her cat to be innovative, I wouldn't start by picking up the standard. I'd start by, what is it we're trying to achieve? And Hilton raised this question already. And how quickly do we think we'd like to do that? Do we know how to do it? What are the gaps? What do we not know? Do we know what's required? Do we know where to go? So imagine you're planning a trip to Mount Everest. You need a checklist. So you can consider the ISO standard as your checklist for whichever particular innovation journey you want to go on. One of the standards I was involved with was 56007. That's the idea management standard. There are several checklists in there of all the things you need to do. They're not sales focused. They're not sexy. They don't have graphs everywhere, but they'll be used by others to do that work. And they can cut straight through that to development work, charity work, where people don't have the resources, where you simply give people a one-page checklist, away you go.
How wonderful to talk about an ISO standard as a checklist. I think that's a language that will help small businesses to not be intimidated by it, because like you said, there's a difference of, say, the ISO standards that is about compliance and a standard like the one you were talking about. So promoting this as a checklist certainly makes it accessible for many more small entrepreneurs. Now, I have another question for you, which is another part of the participants here are practitioners in the ecosystem. They are advising small businesses. So let's say someone here is a consultant to small businesses. They may represent a government agency that is actually advising small businesses. So they are on the advisor side. Could you recommend any approach for someone who wanted to bring this insight, these checklists, and this way of thinking to these entrepreneurs who may have the innovation, but is lacking that process, that checklist to go with? What should someone in that role do?
Okay, so the advisor is being in some fashion paid. It might be free at the point of use, but the advisor is there because it's their job. So they're doing it for some kind of reward. And they're bringing their experience and their capabilities and their qualifications and their knowledge. Fantastic. But what's the trust? The cliche that friends of mine use is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So give your client or the people you're trying to help, give them something that builds trust. Give them an open, trust-based contract. Give them that one-page checklist or the ISO standard that's right for this particular environment. Say, listen, you never have to wonder, am I telling you the truth or not? This is both of our guideline for how we go about this step by step. And because it should never be about clients, we're not saying we have compliance. We're not saying you have to do it this way. These ISO standards, this particular family of ISO standards, because of the nature of innovation, doesn't tell you how you must do something. It tells you what global, acknowledged, validated best practices. And the only requirement standard will be the 56001, and that will tell you here are the things you should consider. Now, prove to us you've done it, prove to it you're doing it, prove to us that when you've done it, it works. Where's your evidence of outputs and outcomes and impact?
So that is that's good news for someone here who is an advisor, right? Bringing these checklists along, bringing these things into the discussions is a fast track to get just small improvements. I like that this is not something where you have to do everything like you described. You can take a step at a time. You can choose any angle, including, I guess, what of the principles to go into. And I know you just gave us 4 of them. That the product creates value, that it has future focus, that it has strategic direction, and that I think it was that it had a cultural consideration. But you can't leave us without just mentioning the last 4.
Okay, that's a really good challenge, David. It was only in the interest of time I stopped reading, you know.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Oh, sorry, that's my own fault. I had this on paper and then I changed the page.
You kept us hanging and now we're curious. That was a good approach.
Yeah. So when I say I really use these things, the coffee stains, I constantly have these things open in front of me. I'm a nerd, God bless me. So down at the bottom of the page, this is page VI of 56002. You don't care, but the point is it's easy to find. Okay, realization of value, future-focused leaders, strategic direction, culture, and therefore more. But if you simply put into any web browser 8 principles of innovation management, you're going to find these really easily. So the next 4 are exploiting insights, managing uncertainty, not risk. Innovation management is not about risk. People who innovate don't increase risk. If people think innovation is about risk, they don't understand innovation. People think that by innovating they increase risk, they don't understand risk. It's easy for me to say that, but you know, that's why it says it here. 2 more, adaptability, not agility, interesting, but we argued over that for about a year, which one of those 2 words would make it in here. And the final one is a systems approach. So those are the 8 principles from that ISO 56000 family. Right. Again, easy to find on the online browsing platform or just typing in the phrase 8 principles of innovation management.
Yeah, and also I must say, when you go through them all, I think they are common sense. There's none of these principles that takes you aback, leaves you wondering. They open up, you know, because they're familiar to you. Probably anyone who's been a consultant or anyone who is a small business will be able to give examples of how they've been using these things for when they created their products. For some, they may say, yeah, I made a product, I know it has value, I sold a lot of it right away. Others may say that I was in a market where there was a lot of uncertainty. And because of the way I made my product, the way I explained it, I configured it, I packaged it, because of the type of technology I put in, because of the user interface or whatever it might be, I was able to reduce uncertainty. That was actually my focus, which then led to revenue. Others will for sure say, we are in software development. We have a very structured system for our innovation. You do sprints in software. You have, you know, backlogs. You certainly have stages of UX design. We make great software because there's a system. So I think these are things everybody is already familiar with, which makes it easy accessible, and certainly something we can encourage everyone here who's a consultant to take a look at these and bring these principles in. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately, but Hilton, if you're still with us, I wonder if you have any perspectives in your ecosystem about these principles of creating value, having future focus, having strategic direction, using system, was adaptability and things like that. Does anyone in any of these in particularly resonate with you? Or what is your perspective on the presentation we just heard?
I think it's very great. You know, it's critical fundamentals. Again, I want to say that, you know, I think we're in a global reset, and in our sector, exactly those principles matters a lot, David. and so it's critical that we consider these in our everyday. I dislike the word vision, right? But in our everyday purposes, right? We have a purpose of being, we have a mission, and those two guiding critical words, if you want, kind of force us to have structured approach. And without those two critical things, I think, we run like this. And I think in our country, for example, in the incubation ecosystem, we created the incubation standards, because an incubator is not a training center. It's not a skill center. It's where you incubate it, where you accelerate. It's a tech hub for innovation, right? It's very different from the way that the Small Business Development Center work. Of course, structurally, you apply business processes, and of course, business advisory processes. And so we've seen, for example, that now we have new policies coming to the fore, and this has always been in our sector: business advisory, coaching, mentorship. It's been like a little loose thing, and the ISO standards has really helped us with defining where we're working with policies and regulation. And I do think that in our country, for example, and across the African ecosystem, is that you do need to bring structure. And if regulation, if ISO standards, it's all kinds of structure, helps with bringing about an ecosystem that is professional, but also that you can keep people accountable and responsible, right? About a year ago, I went to Indonesia, and we were there with the ministry, etc., David. And just in closing, as part of just to kind of capture that structure, is Indonesia is spread over 17,000 islands. They have over 200 and odd languages. They have 269 million people. They have 64 million businesses that create 96% of jobs, 86% of GDP, and 59 million of those are informal micro businesses. And they do this with a structure. And that is the business case of how do we create well-being economies. We've seen that in Denmark, we've seen that in Scandinavia. How do we scale that through Africa and other developing countries around the world?
Thank you so much, Hilton. What an incredible session, Dr. Madie. Thank you for bringing us together. Hilton theunissen from South Africa, Eoin flavin from Ireland, I myself in New York. So what a conversation we had just now. It was global. It was very practical. It was changing, I think, for us who were here, our perspective on what ISO is. Certainly, I'm encouraged to use the checklist and making this real. So thank you, Dr. Madie, and we are
so much, David.
Ready to
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Eoin and Hilton, for your participation in great sessions. We are learning a lot from your best experiences.